Hey everyone, it's Chad Ostrowski here from the Teach Better team, and I'm here with the one, the only, the amazing Mark Horner. And we, right now, in a minute, are going to be building a secondary high school social studies grid live for all of you to watch. It's going to be great. Let's do this. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Building a Grid live series. Welcome back. We've done a bunch of these already. We've seen elementary math. We've seen elementary reading. We've seen so many cool Building a Grid series, and I'm really excited because we're going to take it up a few grade levels tonight. I have Mark Horner here. He is a social studies teacher who teaches AP social studies. I'm going to let him introduce himself in here in just a minute, but I'm absolutely thrilled. Mark, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Could you please just give us a quick introduction, who you are, what you teach, and maybe some of your experience with the grid method?
All right, Chad, thank you for having me tonight. It is a privilege to be here, and I'm super excited. As Chad said, I'm Mark Horner. I teach at Talmadge High School in Talmadge, Ohio, a suburb of Akron. Been teaching for 22 years, and over the past 8 years, I've been teaching advanced placement U.S. history, and I also teach psychology, an 11th and 12th grade elective. And my AP class is actually a 10th grade class. In some schools, it's an 11th grade AP course. I have been teaching history the entire time. As a matter of fact, I student taught in Talmadge, taught 8th grade American history. Then I was bumped to the high school, taught 10th grade American history, 11th grade American history, and then had the privilege of taking over the AP class. And I've been using the grid for about a year, a little bit over a year. Heard about it, was listening to the podcast, heard about it, then went to Teach Better 19 and saw a whole bunch of stuff on it. And I'm a part of the academy and started watching your videos and just started doing it. And most of my grids have been done in my psychology class because it's a real easy fit there. There's
Sure.
not as much pressure when you're teaching a psychology elective, right, as opposed to an
Right.
placement. But this year I've been trying to incorporate. I've actually had the AP class all year, and most of our classes are semester long, and so but I've been using it more heavily in my advanced placement class and have been loving it. So
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. There's a couple things I want to highlight for anyone kind of watching, right? So first, I love the fact that Mark tried it in somewhere he was comfortable taking the risk first, right? So to me, I think that's a really good advice for anyone that's like, I want to try this, but I'm not sure where. Do it somewhere where you're comfortable, where you feel good, where you can take a little bit of that risk. And I love that you kind of dove right into your psychology. You kind of worked out the kinks in psychology, and then once you kind of figured out how it works, then you moved it over to, the more intense subject area of AP. I don't want to say more intense because they're probably both intense, but AP, history, which is probably a little bit more demanding in terms of curriculum and in some of the expectations your students or the school might have. So I absolutely love that. I also want to articulate that when you come to the grid method or when you come to a new teaching strategy, like you're going to come to it from different aspects, right? So Mark took the aspect of he learned about it, he took the course and kind of dove right in. Like that's absolutely awesome to me, right? It's absolutely fantastic. So anyone who's considering this or maybe thinks it's not for high school because like you have to model like what a college classroom looks like, Mark's living proof that you don't. And I love that about Mark. So we've been chatting for a little bit, and I love every time I get to talk to Mark Horner because he's just an awesome guy, and I'm excited for everyone to get to know him. But Mark, let's kind of start getting into the grid we're going to be building, because me and you could talk about this stuff all night, but I want to get to the reason we're here. So give us a little bit of before I put it on the screen, and if you haven't been to one of these, we're going to put the grid up on the screen, and we are going to build and go through this grid step by step by step. And we're going to talk through the components of how you actually make this grid. So give us a little bit of an introduction or any context you want the audience to have before we kind of put all this up on the screen.
Okay.
And anyone listening, before you start, let's give Mark some green hearts, okay? Because this isn't easy, okay? He's putting his soul out there for us to look at. So let's be appreciative of that. And Mark, you can just kind of give us a quick intro.
Well, so yes, the green hearts are appreciated. It is. I mean, I'm hanging out with the legendary Chad here, and I'm so anxious to learn. I've watched the replays, and I've learned so much from them. So I'm anxious to be critiqued, and I'm anxious to tear this apart and just get better. Which happens to be my one word. I stole it from you guys. Better. So here's the context of what we're going to be looking at. We are in what we call a topic 6 or period 6 in AP US history, and it covers 1865 to 1898. So the conclusion of the Civil War, and then 1898, McKinley's election, the Spanish-American War. We're moving into an age of imperialism. And so what we'll be focusing on with the two topics, that's what AP calls them, topic 6.5 and 6.6. We're going to be really looking at the Second Industrial Revolution and how the United States rebuilds after the Civil War, how the Union is brought back together, and then how, through lack of regulation, these big businesses just explode and there's a monopolization in the marketplace, and it begins to then, just reveal all of the inadequacies in society. And that's something that my kids really love to talk about. They're very passionate about equality issues and dealing with social justice issues. And this really brings that into play with the kids. So that's
I love it, man.
Yeah. It's some cool stuff.
Yeah, I love it. So, but what I'm also hearing, and it makes me a little nervous because history is not my strongest subject, which is why I have friends like you, buddy. So I can call you when I have questions. But seriously, that's definitely some heavy stuff. So what's going to be really, really important is there's a lot of information that we could potentially cover in the span that you just talked about, right?
Yep.
There are entire college courses on only specific portions of what you just talked about.
Yep.
So this is why it's so important to always reference, you said they're topics in AP standards, but always reference, if you're teaching a regular US history class that's not AP, reference those state standards too and go, what are they asking me to cover? So you're not covering more than you need to, so you can really hone in and dig into deeper levels. So before we get into these kind of beefy standards, this is going to be really important as we take these first steps. We need to identify what is being asked of us as educators and what is being asked on the part of the student for them to be able to learn. So Mark, here's the moment of truth. We're going to be putting this up on the screen. All right. And here are some of the standards we are looking at. Now, Mark has done an amazing job of giving us some context here. So he not only has the learning objectives, which I think is going to be our main focus in terms of the standards and where we're going to look at our DOK, but the AP, and Mark, please give me some context. If I get anything wrong, just stop me and correct me. Okay. But we also have this list of historical developments. To me, these are less objectives, Mark, and these are more like stated facts we need the students to leave with. Would that be correct?
That would be. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
So these are just kind of stated things that we need to make sure that by the end of this grid, the students can tell you these things, right?
Yeah.
So they're not really objective statements. They're more just like, we need to make sure that in the content we're covering, these things are covered. So I think that's a really good measurement of where. So if you do not teach AP, Mark has even put the aligned Ohio social studies standards, right? So the rise of industrialization, heavy industry, mechanized farming, and the like. Okay. So one thing about historical standards is they often assume causality. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. Yep.
So we have to be careful when we're breaking down the DOK levels of our standard. So I'm going to focus on these AP learning objectives as stated in the curriculum.
Mhm.
Would you agree with like this is where we should be focused here?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I agree with you. Yep.
So if I'm looking at these learning objectives, we have our facts that we have to cover. That's fine. But those facts don't really have any sort of depth of content because the students don't have to do anything. They're just sort of, they need to know that business had made use of technological innovations. It doesn't say to what degree or how they need to know or what they need to do about that information. So that's going to be really useful when we build our grid, those historical developments. But right now, I want to start at that first step. And every single time it's topic, identify the standards or objectives, and then really identify those DOK levels. So let's take a look at explain the effects of technological advances in the development of the United States over time. So do you have an idea of maybe the DOK level you think this might be, Mark?
So I'm thinking that it's going to be level 1 in the sense that, the key vocabulary of the section, just understanding the inventions and the advancements that were made. I mean, they have to know those. There's about 5 or 6 of them that we really hone in on, that they make sure that, Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, Christopher Scholes, the ones that they really need to know in order for them to kind of move on to further analysis. So I would say that explaining the effects of technological advancements, I would say it would definitely fit in DOK 1.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing 1 in terms of them identifying what the technological advances are. So I like that we're pulling that out. Now, for me, I think explaining how the technological advances impacted the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is more of a DOK level 2, because that makes you have to mentally go, here is what the technological advance is. Here is the causality or the effect of that advance on the greater country, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now I think there's components of DOK level 2.
Yeah.
I'm going to make an argument. You can tell me if you agree or disagree, and I'd love to hear in the comments if people agree or disagree with me. I am not the DOK guru. I'm not going to be right all the time, but here's what I'm thinking. Okay. If I'm explaining the effects of a technological advance, what the advance is DOK level 1. Explaining the effects is DOK level 2.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there's DOK level 3 hidden in this statement, Mark, and here's why. Explaining how something advances over time and impacts something over time, to me, could be a higher level thinking task. Mm-hmm. Here's why. You need to understand the comparative analysis between when the technological advance started and then how it impacted things later on. Mm-hmm. So for me to meet this standard, I need to be able to comparatively analyze or compare and contrast the before the technological advance happened, when the technological advance happened, and how that technological advance changed and adapted over time to impact the country. So to me, I think we could label this entire statement DOK level 3. Do you think I'm off there, or does that make sense?
No, I think you're spot on. 1 and 2 definitely build up to a further like a clear understanding of 3. And then what I like about what you're talking about is that it's really honing in on a historical thinking skill of contextualization for us. That's actually an assessed part of our exam. It's one of the things I check for understanding constantly. Do you know how this event fits in, what happened before, what's going on during, and what happens after, and how does it fit into the whole thing? how does it fit into the puzzle? So the way that you explained it right there, I definitely see for sure that this is DOK. The whole statement is DOK 3, comparing and contrasting and citing the evidence.
Yeah, so that's really nice, actually, because I think we can take components of that statement and put it at each level of our grid when we're talking about our learning targets, right? Mm-hmm. So let's look at the next one, which is explain the socioeconomic continuities and changes associated with the growth of the industrial capitalism from 1865 to 1898.
Yeah.
So I might need your help with this one a little bit because I'm a little foggy on like the specifics of this. However, my gut is telling me explaining the continuities, explaining what the continuities are would be the DOK level 1 potentially. There might be some parts of that. Explaining the changes over time and how they impacted the growth is going to be more of like level 2. Is there any component of this that is going to require those students to like comparatively analyze or cite evidence to support a claim or anything like that? Do you think this is more of like stopping at that level 2, or do you think there are components of 3 in this statement?
I think especially the changes component definitely goes into DOK 3.
Okay.
Yeah, the continuity and change over time is a theme that they have to be able to identify and then write about, especially in our long essay questions and document-based questions. So they will have to look at, okay, here we're in the Industrial Revolution, and we're looking at some of these socioeconomic issues, such as low wages and the work environment is unsafe, and the Congress happens to be senators are appointed as opposed to directly elected, so they're a bit corrupt. So then what happens is they've got to say, okay, well, how has this been the same before, and how does it stay the same afterwards? And yet, what actually changes? Because what we're going to go into is the progressive era, where you start to see all of these issues.
The results, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love this. So I want to stop here for a teachable moment really quick, because I think Dave just hit on it as well. A lot of times we go, I'm teaching an AP course, so they have to memorize all these facts and events and dates. But here's the truth, guys. We just had a really good conversation about how these two statements are both, when we analyze them, probably DOK level 3. Maybe high level DOK level 2 and a lot of it, but like DOK level 3 is where it's ending. So if we never get to talking about the over time piece of this, where students are comparatively analyzing events and the advances, them knowing what the technological advances are or when they happened or memorizing who made them or invented them, I could teach that for 8 weeks in an AP course, but my students would never be meeting the standard. So this is a really, really this is a huge take-home message for me, Mark, and it's kind of like a soapbox moment for me, because we just both agreed, and you're much more of an expert than I am for this content, but we both agreed based on these statements, we are at DOK level 3. So if we don't get our students thinking like we just said, we have failed them, and we failed to meet this standard. So we really need to make sure that we are planning deeper, even in these college prep, AP courses, secondary type of environments, right? That doesn't mean throw more words at them. It doesn't mean throw more dates at them. It means do more stuff with the words, with the dates, and with the events. And that's one thing I love about how Mark runs his class and builds his grids, as you're about to see. So Mark, I feel pretty good about kind of establishing if your students can get done with level 3 of this grid, they're probably going to be good to go in terms of meeting the standard. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yeah.
Absolutely. So next, let's talk about our learning targets. Okay.
Yeah.
So would you rather look at this, or do you want to go down and look at your grid? I'm okay either way. I just want.
You know what? So it's interesting. When I was watching some of your other broadcasts, you were talking about, I think maybe you were working with Candace, I'm not sure. And she had mentioned that a lot of times she doesn't do the questioning. She kind of just goes right into the grid. And that's the same as me. I'm going to be honest with you and transparent. I never put the questions on here. I just go straight to the
It's
grid.
okay.
So
Okay.
I had fun doing this. I struggled a bit with it. I wasn't quite sure if I was spot on where you would, look at it and say, okay, I think you're heading in the right direction. So I would love to go over the questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's start with your targets, because our next step is let's develop clear objectives and targets for our students. So right now, and I think you have another one on the grid, so we may need to paste that up here. So I'll leave that up to you if you want to do that. But so for level one, let's keep it simple. Defining and recall basic vocabulary for the units. This is absolutely okay to have as one of your standards. I personally use this as one of my objectives for almost every single level one science grid that I ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Science, like social studies, can be vocabulary heavy. We want to at least make sure that we're giving students a foundation so they can have the context as they move through the unit. So instead of saying, I can define this word and this word and this word, I can define all the relevant vocabulary. Somewhere I would recommend listing that vocabulary, whether it's at the top of the grid or maybe underneath this, but I'm okay with that. However, them just knowing the vocabulary, to me, I don't know if that's gonna necessarily be enough to cover the DOK level 1 portion of the standards that we just looked at, right?
Right.
So I think we also need them to be able to identify the technological advances of the period that we're talking about, right? So I think having them identify the technological advances would absolutely make sense. And then what are other components that they really need to kind of identify or define as they kind of move through this from these two learning objectives that we were looking at?
Okay, you'll have to forgive me. I just proved that you can't multitask and listen at the same time. I typed in identify the technological advances of the Industrial Revolution after you said that, and then what was the second part that you asked?
So that takes care of the DOK 1 portion of this first statement.
Yeah.
The next one is the explain the socioeconomic continuities and changes associated with the growth of the industrial capitalism. So what else do they need to be able to do? Are the content, this might be an ignorant question, I apologize, but it's my lack of content that I'm leaning on you for right now. Are there actual specific socioeconomic continuities they're supposed to know?
Yeah, so there are. So when they look at the way, we have worked, as the United States has grown, as they've gone from being colonies, gain their independence, they become a country, they go through the growing pains, they have to be familiar with the role that, how the economy grows. So we look at that. They have to be, there's social, political, and economical continuities that they have to be familiar with. So they need to be able to link from each period certain economic continuities, connect them here in period 6, and then later on connect them to later on periods.
So is there a cohesive statement we can make? I can define and recall the socioeconomic continuities in the areas of this, and this. Would that type of statement make sense?
Yeah. So if we put down kind of the rise of industry and the growth of the market.
Okay.
And the way that factories affected the growth of, so because I'm trying to think of, there's the market revolution that's occurring before this, and your, that spurs on factories as opposed to, the bartering and trade. So yeah, they should be able to, connect. I'm trying to think how to best word it.
So remember, you're actually getting into some amazing thinking right now that we're going to have to talk about in DOK levels 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Right now, what do they need to be able to point at and go, I know what that means, right? What do they need to be able to give a Google definition of at level 1? That's what I want to focus on right now. So maybe it's just I can identify and define, these, aspects of socioeconomic continuities. Let me ask you this. Are there socioeconomic continuities in every period you discuss? Or is that okay? So what are the specific ones they need to know for this unit that we need to hit on, I guess would be. And I think that's where we can look at the facts, like those facts that we looked at earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for right now, we don't need to go back and dig into all the specifics if they're not like top of mind for you. But what I would say is I can identify and define the socioeconomic continuities of the Industrial Revolution. And then I would just add later or whenever you find it, what are the specific continuities they need to focus on? Is that fair?
That is fair. And I think part of the reason I'm struggling with it is because it is so very broad. I'm trying to narrow it down. And then I'm trying to think as, you know, as an APUSH student, they should understand the effect of the market revolution, and they should understand the American system, and they should understand all this by this point. So, you know, for me to be real specific, but I think the general application is good if we just said, hey, I can identify and define the continuities, the socioeconomic continuities over multiple periods. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I spelled that wrong. Over time, I'm going to put multiple periods.
Absolutely. So to me, by the end of level 1, that means the students are going to be able to define that basic vocabulary, define those technological advances that are going to be really important to those big events and those big, industrialized pieces, and then them being able to identify those socioeconomic continuities for the period that we're discussing is also going to be huge. And if they can know what all those things are, I think they're going to be really well set up for that DOK level 2 stuff we need them to do. So I'm happy with that so far. Okay. Are you happy with that? Are we good with that? I am happy with
it. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So next, I can recognize a cause and effect relationship between the second industrial revolution and the rise of industrial capitalism. I can explain the development of big business and the role of say that for me.
Laissez-faire.
Laissez-faire.
Wow. Laissez-faire, yeah.
I knew what it was supposed to sound like, but my brain wouldn't make my mouth say the words. Okay, so I would actually make that 2 separate targets. I would just kind of press enter at the 1. I think that can be 2. Once again, if anyone's joining us for the first time, here's a note. You can use more than 1 target per level on your grid. I know that's blowing people's minds that at first, because they think they can only put 1 or something like that. You can put more than 1. It's okay. It's going to be all right. This is a safe space. So I can explain the development of the big business and the role of laissez-faire policies. So this is cool because it's going to be listed somewhere, right? But those policies are probably going to be part of the vocabulary we had them develop in level 1, correct?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Takes their memorization of that, and then they're able to apply it, and they're able to see how it fits in.
Yes. And so the rise of industrial capitalism, correct me if I'm wrong, is also going to be one of the socioeconomic continuities.
It is, yeah.
Oh, look at that. See, Mark, you are teaching me AP social studies right now. Like it's happening. Yeah. I can feel it. Oh my God.
You're going to be teaching the course soon.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. So I just want people to see the connection here and how we're scaffolding up, right? So now that we've identified these components, now we're talking about causality. One of the easiest things to do, regardless of how complex the covered material is, even in an AP course, level 1, who, what, when, where.
Yep.
Done. That's what we need the kids to know, guys. That's your and here's the scary part. Some teachers never move past that. They stay at who, what, when, where, and they live in that zone. We need to get past that zone. That's why we're planning to go past that zone. So level 2, now we're talking about why, how, okay? Cause and effect. We are really talking about how things impact other things, how these things apply to one another, okay? So I feel really, really good. I know I'm getting real excited But I feel really, really good about kind of scaffolding this material. Now, here's the other thing, Mark, you mentioned something and you said, you know what? Some of my AP students are already going to know this vocabulary and they should already know some of these socioeconomic periods or these continuities, right?
Yeah.
So like maybe they just really, really know them well. That's why, especially in an AP course, pre-assessing your students before they start the grid could be a really helpful tool. Because if you pre-assess your students and you're like, wow, you already know the vocabulary, you already know what the technological advances are, you already know the socioeconomic continuities, I'm going to start you on level 2. Yeah. Now that student's right where they need to be, and they're not having to go through all the stuff that they already know.
Yeah.
That's one of the powerful things about mastery learning. That's also one of the big things where alignment of assessment to standards to the objectives becomes really important. Because if you don't know if that assessment actually measures that level 1 target, you can't say that the student knows it because it's just random questions, right? Mm-hmm. So I know I'm getting a little bit into the weeds here about the assessment pieces, but that's really, really important to talk about here. Because when we talk about objectives, they need to be measurable statements, right? We need to be able to measure these statements with questions that we're going to be talking about next. We're already halfway done, Mark. Do you believe that? Like, I can't. My gosh.
Hey, Chad, I do have to tell you this is one of the things that I'm so excited about using the grid more in the AP classroom, because you are right. There are kids who take my class that should be teaching the class. They know way more than I do. I've had some of them, and I've got these kids who are college professors now that are teaching history. So when they do come in, the grid allows me to not bore them with entry-level material. So I love that part about saying, hey, you're jumping right to level 3. Skip 1 and 2, you go to level 3, and then you're going to end up at level 5, creating, heck, one kid even wrote a book on Chester A. Arthur. So, I mean.
No way.
So let me clarify, not in my class and not because of the grid. He did it in 8th grade, but that's the kind of student, you got all kinds of kids coming in.
I really wanted to say a kid wrote a book because of the grid. I really wanted to take that away. I'm sorry. I can't clarify. That's okay. I just heard a kid wrote a book because of the grid. I'm just joking.
You know what? Then we're going to make that happen.
That's okay. There's still time. You still have more students, buddy. So that's right. That's a really powerful aspect. So this goes beyond the nitty-gritty of making a grid a little bit, but that's one of the powerful aspects of mastery learning, right? Mm-hmm. You have 2 choices if you run an AP class with advanced learners or gifted learners, or you're just in a high-level high school class. You can bore your kids to death with having to memorize stuff they already know, or you can get them where they need to be. So every single student, if what Mark says is true, every single student in his class is going to grow and learn from where they're at. They're going to grow and learn and grow as a learner, as a student, and as a academic perspective from a historical lens in Mark's classroom. That's where engagement is, folks. Yeah. That's when students engage, when you meet them where they're at and you don't bore them with things they already know. That's why it's so important to dig into those standards and objectives, break those things down so we can identify them and where they're at so we can meet them there. I'm getting way off on third base here, but this is super
I'm loving
exciting.
it. I'm loving it, Chad.
All right. So, okay, level 3. I really like some of the verbs I'm seeing here, buddy. I can compare and contrast monopolies, trusts, and holding companies. I really like those aspects. So I really want to make sure, Mark, when we go back to your level 1 targets at some point, or when you do, I'd like some of the language about trusts, holding companies to show up in the earlier levels, but using them. And does that make sense?
Yep.
So if those things are some of those continuities, maybe add that to the continuity part of that first target. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yep.
Because that's going to make you have a cohesive pathway from standard to understanding what it is, how it works, and why it's important to those other pieces. We don't have to do it all now, but I just wanted to kind of put that in your head. So I think we're identifying those pieces that we were looking for when we were talking about it. That's all.
Yeah.
So I really like the DOK level here. I can cite evidence that supports both captains of industry and Robert Burns' belief about business leaders during this time. So citing evidence is the bread and butter of DOK3, folks. Citing evidence to support claims, citing evidence to support an argument, comparing and contrasting things. Mark is hitting it out of the park here. In terms of really hitting home with higher level tasks in thinking, right? I can develop an argument citing evidence that the laissez-faire policies during the Gilded Age fostered change in the U.S. work exchange technology from 1865 to 1898. So here's something I want to hone in on. This to me sounds a lot like that second standard. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it should, because we both agreed that it was a DOK level 3 standard.
Yeah.
So here's a cheat for you guys. Here's like a life hack for anyone making a grid. The level of DOK where the standard is should sound a lot like that standard when you write your target for that level. It's super simple, but like it should, and it does, right? Because boom, he's hitting that standard. When that kid can understand and make that argument, he knows they met that standard. Yeah. I love it, man. That's perfect. Woo! Getting real excited. Okay. So I also like your other comparative analysis. One thing I want to make sure we mention here that I don't think we have done, and maybe you do. Tell me if I'm missing this. Do we talk about the long-term effects of the technological advances in our level 3?
Do we?
Because I see the economic policies, the socioeconomic policies, and I see the captains of industry stuff. So one thing I'd like to consider adding in our level 3 is, I can cite, I can explain or, sorry, I'm thinking on my feet here.
That's all right. How about?
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you could cite evidence that technology. We're looking at 6.5 technological advancements. How
about I can cite evidence that displays the impacts of technology over time from the secondary revolution. Would that make sense?
That would make sense. And then that would also play into this. You could take that evidence and tie it into supporting them as these industrialists as captains of industry as well. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Those are both, they'll support both of those questions.
Right.
So let's see, I can cite evidence.
That supports the impact. Let me go back here and see what the standard says. This is a good
technological,
that supports the effects of technological advances in the development of the United States over time.
Yeah, that would be.
Once again, all I did was I looked at the standard that we were working from and went, look, it should sound really similar because this is where we said it was supposed to happen, right?
Yep.
So I didn't have to reword a lot. I just took language from the standard and made it performative, made it measurable for the students. Yeah. So
good stuff.
Yes. Okay, we're getting in the woods on this one. I love it so much. Okay. So I can connect information. So now we're at DOK level 4. They've mastered the standard, right?
Yeah.
They don't need to they could stop here and we could be happy. We could go to sleep at night. We could be happy because they've met the standard they need to.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're using some DBQ prompts, which I love. Okay. So I can connect information, learned and analyzed, primary and secondary sources relevant to the DBQ, evaluate the extent big business impacted American politics and economics during the periods of 1870 to 1900. I actually really like the evaluation piece of this. Like having the students evaluate it while analyzing and citing that evidence, I think that's going to bump this up to that DOK level 4. So I can absolutely support that.
Yeah.
One thing we may want them to do with this is add a secondary part where they're either creating an argument or creating a stance or choosing a stance. Something like, I don't know, help me walk through this mentally. Could they create something from this? Because that might help. Or are they creating like a stance for this?
So let me see if I'm clear here. So one thing, just to backtrack just for a moment, the prompt itself is really, it's great because it's a continuity and change. It'll tie in that continuity and change over time.
Agree.
Evaluation again. Something they could create, something that we have done in the past, is I've actually had them make a political cartoon. They've created a political cartoon where they've taken a socioeconomic issue and they've put it on, they've made a point about it. They've taken a position. They've tapped it. We call it that.
Yes, I think create a political cartoon to demonstrate your conclusion from this analysis or from this evaluation. I think that could take this to the next level, because being able to metaphorically think about how to represent the idea from the evaluation that they made, that to me is that next level that we want. That's that next level that we want.
So Chad, let me ask you this. So one of the things that, and I'm reflecting on previous lessons that I've had dealing with this.
Sure.
I have had kids who have come in and they're like, man, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, they are clearly robber barons and this and that. But I've had others who've come in and they've argued for the kind of laissez-faire
capitalism.
Capitalism. And so I'm wondering if I gave them the opportunity on DOK4 to defend citing evidence, well, so that's DOK3, but I'm trying to figure out how they could actually elevate that. I mean, they're going to use
creating a presentation or a political cartoon to sway an audience would be DOK level 4. Okay. Creating a TED talk or a speech to sway someone, creating a cohesive case against or for someone could be DOK level 4. I'm okay with that.
Okay. All right, cool stuff. And if I'm looking to my left, it's because I'm looking at a much larger view of my grid over here. So.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
All right.
So let's table level 5 because I want to get to like the grid stuff because I'm sure everyone else also wants to see. All right, Janelle, I appreciate that.
That's awesome.
All right. That's nice. That makes you feel kind of warm and fuzzy inside. Look at that. Changing the world, buddy. One teacher at a time.
One teacher, one grid at a time.
One grid at a time. One box at a time. Yeah. There you go. Oh, okay. So I really wanted, really quickly, we have not gone over this part because we skipped it in the other aspects, right? So I'm going to go over just a couple of examples, right? So Mark's done a really nice job of taking some of these targets and then saying, what does the student have to be able to do? He literally listed his words right here. This is perfect. This is what the kids have to be able to do to prove that they know that aspect of the target, right? What is the second industrial revolution and how has society changed as a result? Those are simple call and response types of answers that most social studies teachers would want, their students to be able to do. Who are the inventors and businessmen? Once again, who are these people? Just know who they are. And what effect does laissez-faire capitalism have on the American economy? I might be able to argue that this should be in your second level and not your first level, but if the context is there, I could give you some leeway, if that's fair. I'll leave you to kind of judge that. But here's the cool thing about this. To me, one thing that I think we need to address once again is that technological piece. So like, are we covering what are the technological, that would be another question I'd want to ask for level 1, because one of the things we wanted our students to be able to do per our targets was, I can recall, I could identify the technological advances. So one of our questions could be, what were the technological advances of the second revolution, industrial revolution? Are you with me so far?
I am, yeah.
So I think we could just add that to one of our questions. And once again, I want to be super clear about the questions. These are not something Mark is going to give to his students. Like, he's not going to be like, here's all the essential mastery questions you guys have to answer. But Mark, the reason I have teachers do this is whether you actually do it or you just think about it, I need you to know what your students have to do to prove that they know these targets, to prove that they know these objectives. So I think it's really important, because if you need to do a do now, an exit slip, a mini quiz, or a pop quiz, or a discussion for your class, you should be going to this document and going, let's spiral some of these questions and these topics back. This is going to prevent the one thing I hate seeing teachers do. They do all this amazing work to create and curate this amazing experience for their students, and then they just find a random assessment. And Dave Schmidow right now is shivering because he's like the assessment guru on our team. They just they Google an assessment or grab the assessment from the back of the textbook, right? And then they just go, here, this will measure all the great stuff we just did. And I always go, well, hold on, does it? Did we make sure that it actually measures what we want it to measure, right? And in Ohio, by the way, OTES 2.0 coming down the pike, we're going to have a lot more power to create really good assessments and then use that to benefit us as teachers. Just as a note for any Ohio teachers visiting or watching. So I just wanted to cover the question part really quick, because to me, Mark, if a student can answer all those questions, boom, they know what they need to. They can move on. They're ready to go. Would you agree?
I would agree. And you know what, Chad, one of the things I enjoyed doing about doing this, and I'm going to be honest with you, I typed a bunch of questions and I deleted them. I typed more questions. I deleted them. But, you know, when you've been in the game this long, you don't really do a lot of extensive lesson planning anymore, because you know you can. Because
you've done it 15 times or whatever.
You can ask questions, but then as I started writing these questions on here and typing them up, I'm like, just going through the wording and then thinking, it just caused me to continuously revisit the standard and know it even more and more deeper. And then it narrowed down my focus on what I wanted to do in class versus what I wanted them to really explore on their own. So
Mark, at the beginning of this session, you said that your word for the year was better, and you embody that, my friend, because a lot of teachers, with the amount of experience you have, the length of time you've taught this course, you could rest on that binder full of lesson plans for the rest of your career, probably. Yeah. You've taught all of these concepts so many times, you could just roll. But continuing to grow, I just want to give you just like some snaps and some kudos, because like that takes a lot, man. That takes so much just like effort at that point that I just appreciate you. I just want you to know that on a personal level. So
thank you, brother. I appreciate that. And I'm telling you, man, it's teach better. It's teach better. So
let's get into the aspects of your grid. You've already done a ton of really cool work on this grid already, and we will make sure that these grids do get shared at some point when they get completed, so you guys can, you know, have access to them. We will curate them, make sure we get access to them as well, so that if you want to see this later, you can take a look. But I'm going to have you could you paste the new targets into the level 1 for us real quick?
Well, I'm sorry. What you want me to?
Could you paste the new, like, at some point? You don't have to do it right now.
Okay. Remember, I can go back through and
we revised your targets a bit. Yeah. So So make sure that those just get updated. But let's take a look at some of the activities you guys that you're doing. Do you want to walk through kind of just how you laid out this level one? Just kind of could you walk us through what your students are going to be doing?
Yeah, sure. So, for a little bit more context, this year we're on a hybrid. So I see, kids every other day. So I get they're in the class 5 out of 10 days. And so things are a little bit different now. I'm leaning real heavy on Khan Academy to cover
Sure.
a lot of content. So they'll, for level one, they would watch Khan Academy. There's a couple videos, the introduction to the Gilded Age, and then the second Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And they would watch, there's 2 videos. And then there's actually just a little, post-assessment 4 questions covering the content that they would take
Sure.
on Khan Academy. Then part 2 would be they would read AMSCO. That's our textbook. It's actually a survey, an overview, but they would read 6.5 and 6.6 and take notes. And then what I do is I provide a check for understanding Google form. I'll put
Nice.
a Google form with either a stimulus-based question or
Right.
a political cartoon, or just simply ask them. Sometimes I'll just ask them, what did you find interesting and what wasn't? Just a little check for understanding.
Sure.
Then we also have, I have a lot of antiques and a lot of junk. You can see a lot way back there along the wall. I have, a lot of old stuff. And so I put little QR codes on them and they can scan them and they can get the history of whatever it is, whether it's an Edison phonograph that's over there, or if it's a washboard, multiple washboards that are there. Heck, there's even a Sony Walkman, which is kind of funny because then it ties it into, other advanced
Over time. Yeah.
Yeah, over time. Record players. And then they just they go back and they scan and tools and all kinds of stuff. And
can I just pause real quick? Because I love this activity.
Yeah.
So with this museum walk, this is a really, really good example of a task that could literally be on any level of the grid. And the determining factor of which level it ends up on are the questions you are going to ask your students. So maybe they do the museum walk and you just say, what are 5 of the technological advances that you saw in your walk? And how do you think they have impacted, because remember, the standard is what are technological advances that occurred during the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's been covered in their notes at some point, I'm sure, or the reading that they just did. But now you're kind of bringing it all together into this activity here. So the questions that you ask them about that experience are really where you're going to drive home that target. And those essential mastery questions are going to be where you're going to get some of those questions, right?
Yeah.
One thing I love about this pathway so far is you literally have 3 different modalities and we're only 3 boxes into your grid. They've watched a video, they've read some material, and they've written some things. They've taken a digital assessment and they've done a physical hands-on activity. I love that. Don't any AP, any high school teacher watching this right now, just think about that for a minute. In 3 boxes on a grid, Mark Horner has done 3 separate modalities for his students. And they're doing hands-on activities at the lower levels. It's not Mark just lecturing for 47 minutes and saying there's a test on Friday. We don't need that. They need to be having these quality, high-level experiences in their classroom. I get really excited when I see stuff like this, so I'm going to let you continue. But I just really wanted to make a note of that.
So, the 2 things about the museum walk that I love, one of my colleagues here, Jared Taylor, he does the same thing. He teaches the 10th grade American history course, and he does a very good job with exactly what you're talking about. He's like, go scan the QR code and then take Edison's phonograph and link it to your phone and the fact that you listen to music on your phone and just, study the advancement, connect them through a couple other, inventions in between, which is really neat.
So that would be, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So I was going to say, so that would be a really way to take that activity, and then you could even have them go back later in the grid to the notes they took on that activity. You could have them walk through the museum 3 times The first time is to identify the technological advances. The second time is to discuss the impact. And the third time is to discuss long-term impacts and comparative analysis of the effects. So now you're talking about, you can take a student through the same experience, but have them look at the complexity, right, of that experience in multiple different ways. Guys, DOK is not stagnant. It all depends. It's not about, the museum walk is not only one level of DOK. It can be any level you need it to be. It's about the thinking the student has to do while they're going through it. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, I love that. I've made note of that. That's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to keep revisiting it every period. So
there's one thing I want to talk about here at the end of the level. This is something I actually recommend in almost all of our trainings that I do with teachers, at least on the level 1. You can do it on every level, but putting an end of level quiz where you're just kind of wrapping it up and making sure they have those fundamentals down before they're going to start applying them is always, I think, a good practice. It's just a nice little gateway to kind of give a little mastery quiz. You got your 85% required. I love it. And you're also giving them multiple attempts. So if they don't do it the first time, it's okay. That's what mastery learning's all about. So I absolutely love it. So are you okay? Are you feeling pretty good about this? I feel pretty good about this from my perspective. So but are you good with level 1?
I am, but I will ask you this. Do you feel like that's a balanced amount of work, or do you think that's because, pacing is a big issue. And so when I looked at this and I made this sort of like a mini grid, so I combined, both topics, do you think that's okay as far as student pacing and work there? Or do you think there's too much there?
No, I actually think this is a really good pacing, because if you think about it, the quiz is going to be 10 minutes or less, right? The video could be 15, 20 minutes, depending on how much they're paying attention. So you're looking at maybe 2 to 3 class periods, depending on the pace of the student. That's my gut reaction of where that's going to be. So I think you're solid there. I think kids are going to be able to move through this at a relatively fast pace if they want to, if they're focused. And then if on that second day they're getting behind, give them a little bit of a conversation, hopefully get them moving a little bit, maybe some intervention, and we can get them moving through. Okay. But I do think, to me, it feels okay. Okay. My gut reaction is that it's okay. One thing I would like you to kind of just evaluate as you kind of finalize this is the questions you're asking the students, right? Make sure they're lining up to meet those standards as they go through, right? So that's just like a little note, because I don't know what the questions are, but we did do the work of creating those mastery questions. So let's not let that go to waste, right? Yeah. Let's make sure those things are coming back. All right.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at level 2. You want to talk us through that?
Yeah. So for level 2, when we're looking at that cause and effect relationship, the first thing that I have them doing is watching an overview of topic 6.5 and 6.6 by a gentleman, his YouTube channel's Heimler's History, and we use that puzzle. And there are questions embedded into it. So, and it's Ed Puzzle. It's awesome.
Ed Puzzle is a great resource for mastery learning.
Absolutely. Then there's another Khan Academy, and it's a short one. It's a very brief video, but it's called The Rise of Industrial Capitalism. So it takes, what's going on with the Industrial Revolution, and it elevates it. It starts talking about the monopolists and laissez-faire economics. And so they'll watch that and take notes. And then the next activity would be to take there are 3 Gilded Age political cartoons, and they are on a Google slide, and they each have a copy of it, and they HIP it. And that's what we use. That's our little acronym for historical context, intended audience, point of view.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, purpose. So it's a skill that we teach them so that they're able to then use that skill with the document-based question.
Yeah,
so
I like
later on when they write, they have to be able to HIP a couple documents. So that's skill practice. but looking at those political cartoons, and they're the popular ones that kind of focus on the monopolists. And then again, the last one is 6.6 is a quizzes. I just made 6.5 for level 1, 6.6 for level 2.
Sure. So this is a really good example of the idea that we can do notes on level 2. So a lot of people are like, you can only do notes on level 1. You can only do like a video on level 1 because you're giving them information. However, let's review what I said before. If they're thinking about the information you're covering at higher levels, it's okay, right? So just make sure as we're going through this that those experiences the students are having in the context in which they're thinking about the content is at those levels we discussed, right? So as long as that's true, which I think it is based on just my initial gut reaction, I think that's a really, I think you're all set. But I just wanted to kind of touch base on that. Once again, multiple types of activities. You have 2 videos here. Now, if I'm being completely honest, if you would have had a 3rd video, we would have had to have a conversation about it for me. But no, that's just me, right?
Yeah.
Like anytime I see something 3 times in a row, I go, hold on. If I'm a kid, I'm going to go, seriously, another video? Like, let's do something else. But you did it, buddy. You got this political cartoon activity. So it's switching things up, and then you got the quiz. So you're mixing up your activities. Once again, thank you for kind of proving that it is possible to do engaging in different types of activities, even in the context of advanced coursework like an AP history class. Let's talk about, can you review the HIP thing one more time?
Sure.
I think that could be helpful for some other people that maybe want to utilize that if they're not familiar. I just want you to review it really quick.
Yeah,
because I think that's a really good assessment tactic.
Yeah, well, it's our process of analyzing primary and secondary sources. And so the H stands for
real quick. Primary, secondary sources is part of the social studies standards in every single grade level I've looked at. So everyone that teaches history or social studies in Ohio right now, listen to this. Okay, sorry.
So we look at the document or the speech or the political cartoon, and the H is, okay, what's the historical context of this cartoon or this stimulus is what we would call it, primary, secondary source. Then who's the intended audience? That's the I. Then the P is what's the purpose, and then the other P is point of view. And then and we call it HIPPO. There's actually an O that's attached to it, and it's part of the organization. Where does that fit into the final product, which is the document-based question? How does it fit into our argument or what we're writing? So historical context, intended audience, purpose, and point of view.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great tool to use. And you put little hippos everywhere. And in my old room, I have a Hungry Hippo game, so I'll walk over and hit the mouth and let's hip it real fast. And
So that's a really good point though, because you're teaching your students transferable skills at that point, right? You're teaching them how to analyze primary and secondary sources so they can do it whenever that comes up. So I love that you're building that skill. You're focused on more than just the content, but building the skills that they need. So we're running out of time. So I'm going to be the next part really quick.
Gotcha.
The time flies when I'm talking to you, Mark. It's so much fun.
This is a blast.
So real quick, one thing I want to highlight, we talked about your level 4, so I think we're good there. For your level 3, I really love the fact that you're not, you have some, it's not fully done yet, but looking at it, you have your summative assessment, which is perfect. I think that's great. But they're doing things like tweeting things and defending their methods and contributions. They're creating thesis statements. This is what higher level work looks like. I want everyone to take a note right here. Mark isn't giving them another lecture about basic people, places, things, and events at this point. Mark is going, you have all the information you need. Let's get to work and do stuff with it. Sorry, I don't know if you're actually saying that with this grid, but that's what I hear when I look at this grid.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is. Yep.
But that's a good lesson for anyone watching. By DOK level 3, your students better be doing stuff with the information. If they're not, your grid's probably broken. Okay. If you're still just doing basic, like, fill in everything, like, fix it. Okay. That's my really blunt way, I guess. And then once again, we talked about the DBQ, maybe making a political cartoon for the level 4. But man, we are running out of time, and I feel horrible because I could talk to you for a lot longer. But Mark, just so everyone's aware, took the time to visit from his classroom. Okay, that's how dedicated this man is to the audience, the Teach Better team, and everything else. So I appreciate you, brother. Any final thoughts on changes you're going to make, over the next few days, or any kind of final thoughts you want to kind of give our audience on, the grid itself?
Yeah. So I'm definitely going to be going back and revisiting and making those tweaks and tidying up some of the verbiage. But I think, and this is what's been really interesting about the quarantine, and I'll make this really fast, but when we entered into the quarantine, I had to really lean heavy on the grid. I realized that it didn't have to be perfect. I just had to put something out there, and then I had to revisit it and tweak. So this year I took what I did last year and I cut things out and I got rid of things. Chelsea Nicolino was on here a while ago. Yeah. I watched her little Instagram post about how she would hand out just one grid at a time, level 1 and then level 2. So I tried that to see and I asked for my students, what kind of feedback I got from them. And for one of my classes, that worked really well. And so that's what I've continued to do in my psychology class. Just release level 1. We all finish it together, then level 2. And in my other class, they just liked having the whole thing and working on their own. And so you just fit it, and then you revisit and you realize that it's okay to fail. It's the only way that you're going to learn. It's okay to say, hey, there was too much here, and
right.
And it's a wonderful tool. And I feel so much, I feel way better, now that I got to sit down and talk to you about this. I feel a lot more confident in what I'm doing.
Oh, I love it, man. You're doing a great job. Keep up the good work. Mark, thank you so much for your time tonight. Everyone, have a fantastic night and stay awesome. So we'll see you guys next time. Have a great one.